But there's one I want to talk about today, and that is the set of guidelines we're releasing today to give schools and communities the tools they need to protect their children. Now, a lot of you are professionals out there. I'll bet you your police department was contacted by about every school district, every school in your district, saying, what do I do if this happened in my school? I personally, members of Congress were getting calls from their district. I personally was getting calls from around the country. Joe, what do we do if anything remotely similar to what happened at Sandy Hook happens in our community? And so the one thing the federal government can really do well, better than any single jurisdiction, is they can scour the nation and find out best practices. They are able to assess and gather all the resources to say what works best. What are the best evacuation plans? What are the best prevention plans? What are the best actions that could and should be taken in the event of a shooter in a school? We provided guidelines in the past, but different agencies sometimes had different messages. So under the leadership of our team, we brought in Homeland Security, which includes FEMA, the single best disaster relief operation in the world, the FBI. We brought in in addition to the FBI, we brought in the Justice Department overall. We brought in and instead we insisted that they sit down together, not separately, together, and make sure they were all on the same page as what were the single best recommendations that could be made. So there's a coherence to this. They all have had significant input in dealing with disasters. And so we put them together in one room with more than 100 experts, from law enforcement to higher education, from K to 12 teachers to first responders to emergency planners. And we said, all of you come up with what you think are the best practices, the most concrete recommendations that you could give us that will enable us to teach or prepare or lay out a menu for the school districts and churches. The interesting thing is, I think it surprised most people a little bit. Remember Eric and I sitting there, and we had the faith leaders. The faith leaders not only wanted to talk about making schools safer, they're worried that their congregations are at risk. So they wanted to know, what should they be thinking about when someone stands up in the middle of a congregation and decides to do something similar to what we saw in the schools? So we gave concrete direction. There are 3 documents that are being made available today. A guide for developing high-quality school emergency operation plans, and that is for K through 12, and a guide for developing high-quality emergency operation plans for institutions of higher learning, and a guide for developing high-quality emergency operation plans for houses of worship. So toward that end, we took a very, very hard look. And when a school principal gets in touch with the federal government looking for advice, as I said, they shouldn't hear from the Justice Department and then the Department of Education and the Department of Homeland Security with we gotta make this bite-sized, we gotta make it understandable, and we gotta make it available. The best thinking in the country. And we made sure the guidance reflects all the lessons we've learned over the years to ensure that schools, higher education, house of worship have an opportunity to share the latest and best knowledge as an advancement in emergency planning. All that work has been distilled down to the guidebooks I referenced. These books outline a detailed process that every school, every institution, every house of worship should go through to create their own plan within the framework of the best policies available. The guidebooks ask each school or house of worship to consider the fundamental questions that go into the kind of planning and to come up with answers to the questions in close collaboration with local first responders. So the practical impact is we're asking and suggesting, in addition to the specific guidelines we provide, is asking a school district or a school that wants to put in place the best emergency plan to call a meeting. Call a meeting with their local government officials, call a meeting with the police officers, with the first responders, with the fire department, etc., and sit down and go through what are the unique aspects of their concern in their school. It details what information can and cannot be shared, for example. There's three pieces of this. One, what can we do through these guidelines to maybe prevent a shooter or a disaster from occurring in a school? One of the things those of you in education know, my wife's an educator, is that there are a number of rules that are out there to protect privacy, the privacy of the student, so it can't be misused. So there's all kinds of federal regulations, actually three big ones. And so school districts and school officials are calling and saying, what am I able to make available? What can be shared about a student or an adult's mental health, past behavioral patterns? What can be shared about their background where I don't violate the law? What am I able to share? Share with the parents, share with the law enforcement officials, and share with those in the school system, so that we may be able to nip in the bud the threatening behavior that we see and is obvious in some students. It also talks about locks and barriers and walls that can be used to protect children. We make sure the planners are asking the right questions. What are you going to do if there's an emergency? How are you going to find out? Who needs to know? What's your plan for alerting teachers and students? Where should they go? How will you make sure the students with disabilities can be taken care of? If there's a fire, do you have an evacuation route? If the route is blocked, what's the alternative route? If, God forbid, there's an active shooter, how are you going to alert the people? Do teachers know what they should do? These books will tell you what to do, and they start with the conversation that schools and communities should already be having with their first responders, parents, and teachers. And we're going back, and we're going to back it up with training. The Department of Homeland Security has conducted briefings on over 100 school districts thus far. In addition to that, the FBI worked with some of the top experts in the field at Texas State University to update Justice Department tactical training for officers that respond to active shooter situations. The FBI held a 2-day workshop on active shooter situations at every single one of the 56 field offices nationwide, which reached senior command staff from more than 1,850 state, local, tribal, and campus police agencies working with communities that represent millions of people. This is a huge mobilization of the resources to make sure that our front lines and law enforcement know absolutely what the best protocols for responding to these situations are. And it's going to help save lives, not only potential victims in harm's way, but cops as well. So as I've said, we've made significant progress here. Taken together, each of these actions I've outlined today would reduce gun violence in America.